you see, we use gyro technology. Now, gyro, that's only one problem about the gyro, is that you can't put it at the rim of the craft, right on the rim, because you've got to control it by striking it from outside of it. You can't do good striking on the inside because it don't do nothing. It won't respond. But if you strike a gyro on the outside, it tips at that point, instant.
The inside of the flying disc generator was equipped with switches and circuits to activate 64 hammers positioned around the rim.
It was in this field we solved that problem.
So which way would they fly?
Down this way, or over the trees and round. It depends whether it was late evening or day. If it's daytime, we go over the trees. When it starts getting dark like this, you could run up and down this. The chance of vehicles coming up there was very unlikely.
John Searle's time here was short. By 1955, he moved his family to 17 Stevens Close, Mortimer, Berkshire. But now he could control the flying disc generator.
And I haven't been here for a very long time, but that was where my early days experiment was done. That's before we used Warminster area for the big work. We built a total of 41 crafts that actually flew and were fully controllable. There were 6 before that were lost. They could not be controlled.
During the 1950s, John Searle continued to experiment with his flying disc generator, but it needed a name.
One thing I didn't know was that gravity can be inversed. No scientists ever had come up with that idea. That clearly the magnetic field was completely different to the magnetic fields we knew of.
The heavy rollers spinning as they rotate around the plates acted like a flywheel and caused a gyroscopic effect. The extremely high voltage created a dense field surrounding the generator, a device built with individually magnetized components.
It was a device, and it contained all these signs within it. You've got the gyro, type control effect, a frequency control, magnetic, electrons, photons, basic, nearly every science involved in one engine.
Incorporating these principles displayed by the device, he christened it Gyro Flywheel High Energy Density Mechanical Magnetic Device, but it would soon be known as the Levity Disc.
And the first successful one was launched in 1956. It went up. We flew it across the houses, because Crompton Hill, we're up above the houses. It's a wonderful sight. You should go there. And we flew this over the rooftops, and then we had a surprise. You see, we saw the tiles waving as it went along, and the din that made it in the middle of the night was absolutely fantastic. And the reason is, of course, there's a suction underneath this. It's in a wave, this suction is. And it pulls these tiles up and down. Some fall to the ground, obviously. But what we also found is that when pigeons or birds flew near to it, or they were taken by surprise and they got caught, they fell to the ground. And of course, when they hit the ground, they break their necks. So you saw in the papers, birds died from UFO. And made it quite clear to them it was not a UFO. The government knows. It's identified. They know what it is. Every government knows what it is. They've known it for years. I said, so we're dealing with something in reality.
By 1956, the first team of investors agreed to fund John Searle and the research on his Levity disc. This group of 13 pensioners assembled as a club called Launch Unit Navigable Individually Controllable, or Lunic Enterprises.
And we toyed with this down in Warminster, where we built these, what was labelled UFOs. We call them Levity discs, but we built this. Now 13 old-age men backed that project, and they only backed me on the following condition, that I did not go commercial with this. They didn't want any problems with taxman. They were doing this for fun. But to me, that was all right. That was giving me a chance to experiment, work out ideas. To prove two things. It could hold together, and it could fly. Okay. And this is what we proved.
That it could hold together and it could fly. The device as an electric generator for domestic use became an afterthought. John Searle knew this was the beginning of his lifelong battle with official persons and with the scientific community. Very soon, British civil aviation had questions about the levity disc. What happens if the power fails? How do you steer it? And the big question, how does it fly?
You've got to put a load, resistance load, on the generator to speed it up. And once it starts, you get to about, on average, about 1 million volts. It begins to really build up a charge. Then this superconductivity switches in, and the earth pushes it up. But it's also affecting the atmosphere above it. It is making it pull to the rim and rotate with a field. So you've got like a hurricane effort. It's sucking it up. Over the years we experimented with many ideas. The trouble was the authorities said that we could not fly this device in public on show unless we made some means to control it in event of power failure. We call this a flight cell, and what we've done is that all around the vehicle we've chopped it into 64 sections in which we can open a section. The idea was that by opening one you could direct the angle. Across the pass, the smallest flying machine we could fly, which would be controllable by hand operators, was a 21-footer.
The need for a craft that large was because anything smaller than that couldn't hold the vacuum tubes or valves, as John calls them, or the transformers or the radio equipment. There just wasn't enough room. Also, in order to direct this craft, it needs certain electronic solenoid equipment and some hydraulics.
In those days, we had to use very large bottles, big heavy transformers, big chokes, they all take up a massive relays. And there was a GPO type, they were very large. So we're looking at a massive weight.
64 flight cells at the rim of the levity disc could be opened or closed independently, changing the energy flow, which caused the disc to tilt and turn, to accelerate or stop, to gain or reduce altitude. Signals to the flight cells were sent using ham-operated radio. The command signal was always preceded by a coded radio signal to prevent outside interference.
Ham operators, and I must admit that without their help this could not be done. You have to have some signal coming from it to be able to trace it.
If you have a series of ham radio operators that are willing to help you, and the professor did. John would call them and tell them when the unit should be, when the disc should be over their position, and then it also emitted a beacon so they could triangulate on it, and then make a course correction that he would tell them the code to use. So they would give a frequency code to the ship. It would make a course correction if needed to go wherever he wanted. And he had a whole series, whole network of hams all across the world.
I used 1,200 cycles for my transmitter carrier. That's why the authorities came after me when they saw the transmitter I was using on television.
Yeah, it was military.
We got to confiscate that. That's illegal. We have no rights to that. So I said, well, if you take that away, how do I protect the public from this massive weight up there? This equipment gives me the carrier of 1,200 cycles a second. I need that to carry my information to that craft so I could continue transmitting and carrying out this flying research work.
Although he tried, it was hard to keep the levity disc secret. John Searle saw a future that would want to take advantage of his generator and levity disc.
It's the flying side that brought the money in.
Yeah.
In 1968, we reached the greatest height we ever done.
The generator could be used as a power source. But it was the flying side that caused excitement. These craft had designations and sequence numbers, such as the P-11.
Probe means a probe. It's a man. PM if it's a manned vehicle. These first ones we did were all unmanned.
In his growing library, John Searle kept extensive records of his generator and levity disk. Among these documents are calculations and descriptions of experimental flight tests, some of which survive today. These are photos and excerpts from the original record of the P-11 launch on June 30th, 1968. We have carried the P-11 weighing 10 hundredweight to a position clear of the overhead high-voltage lines. The sun is shining, but it is not pleasant. The wind is cold and a force of 8 is blowing. We shall attempt a full launch and run at 1500 hours Greenwich Mean Time. We prepared the power supplies to all equipment on the craft. We are very busy. Yet from the corner of my eye I can see watchers, but none have dared to enter the field. People rush to hide from us as if we were some kind of aliens from another world. Time to start the craft's generator up. This is connected to an outside source, in our case a small diesel engine. A minute passes by and the cutout switch of the craft breaks contact with the outside power source. The call comes through from Cornwall that all is ready. The carrier beam is on for the run. We accelerate the craft's generator. Now she is on her own. When the generator started, there was a whine rising to a high pitch, but that has stopped. The craft is shorting up very fast. Yes, the craft will clear the power lines with no trouble. I have stopped taking photos to record what I saw. The ground appeared to be rocking, yet I could not sense any such rocking. No noise was heard, but leaves and other material on the ground around us began to move in circles. I glanced over the far side where 2 strangers were. What happened to them? They were running for cover in the direction from which they had come, most likely scared stiff. Then the call came in. She's crossing Cornwall now. Time, 15:03 hours Greenwich Mean Time. Our team in Cornwall turned the craft for its run back. The P-11 was over Cornwall 3 minutes after launch, a distance that would take 4 hours to travel by car. She climbed at rates of up to 1 mile per second, and during that day rose to heights of 15 miles above the surface of the Earth. We went over to the launch point and found that all the small undergrowth had been pulled up with the soil and had left a scooped-out effect where the craft had stood. Another problem we must solve is this pulling up of Earth on liftoff and this burnt ring mark effect.
We found that it does tend to mark the ground. The reason for this is that there's an iron content in the ground. It is this iron that's been pulled up, and it pulls that surface of ground up with it. Instead of having the rare earth on the outer layer, put it on the inner, reverse, and of course it solved it, just in one action. Instead of having a magnetic field focusing to the ground, it made a donut shape around the vehicle. The field now is a very small C field around the rim of that craft. Results is no focus to the ground, no ground distortion occurs. The other problem often presented in my case when scientists speak about my work is that it ionized the air around the craft. This is not true. There is no air around that craft. There's a magnetic field, there's a gap, a vacuum between that and the rim, and it's the photons which is discharged, trapped by the magnetic field, which gives it the glow.
The P-11 was a great secret success story, a beginning to a new age which promised that one day in the future, man would travel by this method into space.
Was it secret?
It was supposed to be, but only the media was allowed to come and watch. First we had 400 scientists that were also allowed to come who downed it. What they said was this: it could not support itself, let alone fly. So I said, right, we have now tested 40 different structure ideas. I'm going back to the one I originally proposed. You are invited and the media to come and watch, providing you do not disclose where the work is done. Sunday Tidbits came.